Hello and welcome to the Car Care Not Reviews channel, and welcome to what is a true classic in my opinion. A 1999 Mazda Miata, or Mazda MX-5 if you want to be correct with the model name. Now there's something very interesting about this Mazda. They are rising in price, and examples with low miles and really clean and decent shape are becoming harder and harder to find. And many of them are modified, many of them have been crashed multiple times and high miles and whatnot because they were actually a true pleasure to drive. Now this particular one is a 1999 NB1, 55,000 miles, very clean inside and out. It is an automatic, but that is also okay. Something about this generation of Mazdas, this is a time where Mazda were a completely different company. They did things as they wish. Total different company, the luxury direction that they're heading right now. And in this video, we're going to check this thing out and show you how classic Mazdas are in 2023. Let's take a look under the hood of the Mazda Miata. And this engine is such an interesting engine. It's a 1.8 liter four-cylinder engine, but it had so many revisions over the years that sometimes the same generation had different revisions, like this particular generation. So this engine initially had hydraulic lifters, and while some people will say, well, that's better, but actually in those days, hydraulic lifters were not the most desirable thing in the planet. The technology and the engineering were just not there to make them as reliable as they are today. And the oils were not as advanced as they are today. So anything with hydraulic lifting was not very desirable back in those days. So initially, this engine had hydraulic lifters. Well, in '99, it does not. It actually has solid lifters. And then this engine has a lot of little stuff that got updated over the years. Let's talk about a few of them. So Mazda was extremely proud of this back in the day, that they designed an intake manifold that is not huge, that doesn't crawl over the engine, but it actually has short, long runners. That was such groundbreaking stuff back in the 90s. Today, I think every car has that, and some cars don't even need that because just things have changed. But the coolest thing about this is this intake manifold is aluminum. And usually that is extremely difficult to do in an aluminum manifold, very costly, and it's extremely heavy and it makes it super complicated. But Mazda somehow in those days found a way to make it compact, not very expensive, and it works pretty good. And that is one of the highlights of this engine. It has short, long runners without having the thing that goes over the valve cover and does all that. That is pretty cool. Now, something else about this engine. This is a timing belt engine. Of course, we're in the 90s now. This engine had a timing belt, and the interesting thing about it, and this is something the likes of Honda also did, you have to remove the valve cover to do the timing belt. Probably not the best idea in the planet. Today, of course, with labor costs of mechanics being very high, that would not be ideal. But back in the day, they deemed, it's not really a big deal. You just got to remove the valve cover. It is not a big deal, but still, it adds to your maintenance cost. But something else they did in this generation, and particularly, and this is where I tried my best to get you as accurate information as possible. In '99, they changed some of the characteristics of the cam and crank sensors. I guess they had an issue with the first one, they changed it. And then in 2001, they completely changed this engine. It's still the same engine, but they added variable valve timing to it, changed the compression. But the biggest thing that me and you care about is this engine went to premium fuel. Now, premium fuel is not the end of the world, but when you're talking about cars like this, that's a bit much because now you're adding a lot of cost to your ownership, while this, which makes a little bit less power, but still fully adequate, takes regular gas. And that's why I think the 99 and 2000 will be the future classic, because even the variable valve timing one, it really doesn't make a lot of power. That's not the point. The point of this car is it has adequate power, and this one does have adequate power to make it fun, to make it exciting, and I mean, it's a Miata. We don't need to say more. Then we look at some of the, I guess this is where this is a breath of fresh air to me, at least as a mechanic. The little old school touches. Now, this was the years where we were emerging from distributor cars into the modern era. They invented something in the automotive industry called waste spark. So basically, when one cylinder fires, its sister cylinder also fires at the same time, even though it's not doing anything. That's waste spark. So two cylinders are firing at the same time, hence you have two coils. This is a waste spark system. Very popular in the 90s. It was leaps and bounds better than distributor cars and their mess and the timing, and because now the computer controls when these spark plugs fire, not the mechanical distributor. That was a huge leap forward. But with that, of course, this is super old school stuff now. You have spark plug wires and all this stuff, and it just adds to its patina and look. You know, when you see an engine with coils, yeah, it looks okay. But when you see an engine with spark plug wires, it just looks so cool. As a mechanic, it just brings happy memories, let's put it this way. Something else about this engine that is very interesting for Mazda to do, and it was kind of an early thing to what modern cars are, the fuel pressure regulator. So most cars in this era, they had a return system. So basically the fuel comes out from the fuel tank, goes to the fuel rail where the injectors are. Whoa, the fuel injection system was such a cool thing. And then the excess fuel goes back to the fuel tank. It was a very redundant system, didn't really work. Most cars don't even have that anymore. But they had a fuel pressure regulator that was regulating how much of that fuel bleeds back and goes back to the fuel tank, and they were usually vacuum controlled. Well, in the case of Mazda, it isn't, and that's the interesting thing. Right here in the engine bay, you have a very innocent looking, overcomplicated a bit, fuel pressure regulator, and that it's not vacuum controlled, and you have a little too much lines going on. So you have a line coming from the rail into the regulator, then a little line that connects the regulator to the fuel line that goes all the way to the fuel tank. Very little complicated, but it's so simple. Everything is extremely simple in this car. Everything is simple. Then we look at the little details, and these are the stuff that most people don't notice or wonder why they are that way. If you look at the radiator, 90% of cars in the 90s, they had the straight radiator with the two little brackets on the side. That was the iconic design of the time. This car has that design, but it also, if you notice, the radiator is slanted a little bit. The reason for that is they wanted to keep the nose low, but they wanted to put a big enough radiator for good cooling, because this little four-cylinder and this little car actually has two cooling fans and a pretty large radiator. Usually cars, you get into a Honda Civic from this generation, the radiator is tiny. This has a full-size radiator that is pretty big. It basically looks like a V6 radiator, but it is in a Miata. And that is one of the brilliant engineering at the time. So they slanted this radiator a little bit to get better airflow when you come in, and then you can fit a bigger radiator because it's sitting sideways. That is pretty cool. And then there is the relics of the past, is what I call them. The diagnostic port. These were the days where scan tools were still a new thing, and most of your diagnostic happened in that little diagnostic port where you jump 2 pins to get codes and whatnot. That was really nice to see. And then this engine comes from the era of vacuum lines. But surprisingly, I have to say it, there is not a sea of vacuum lines. And that is something that's really annoying to work on old cars with vacuum lines, because first, half of them will break when you work on them. Second, it just creates this maze of things that you have to figure out exactly where they go. Otherwise, you'll have all kinds of vacuum leaks and things won't work right. But this engine doesn't have that, and that is cool. The only vacuum lines I see are on the side. They're not really over the top, and that is pretty cool. And then there's a few things with the Mazda Miata that I love. One of them is the location of the washer bottle. Now, most people think the washer bottle is insignificant, just a little bottle. Who cares where it is put in the car, right? Well, actually, no, because when you have the washer bottle in the front hanging over the wheels, that is actually a little bit of weight that's hanging over. When we're talking about a lightweight car like this, it does matter. So if you notice, the washer bottle sits very back, very unusual place, but that is intentional to keep some weight behind the front wheel. any weight possible behind the front wheel. If you notice, even the engine itself, the bulk of it, of the weight of it, is behind the front wheel. That helps this car, with its very basic suspension, handle super well. It's these little engineering touches that make a difference. But then wait, there is more. If you look at this inner structure under the hood, this car actually has an exposed kind of subframe within the unibody. The frame rails are literally exposed and they're almost by the engine. And then there's this big reinforcement in the back. That is pretty cool because newer cars, they definitely do not have that. They all have their crumple zones and all the craziness going on, but you will not see exposed frame rails like that. But the other thing is, something common with these is these very frame rails to rot from rust. Now this particular one looks beautiful because it is a preserved model that doesn't really have rust at all, so they are beautiful and shiny. But normally this is one spot you want to look at when you're buying one of these. Let's take a look underneath the MB1 Miata. The first thing is we did remove one cover that was here just so we can take a look closer. I mean, look how simple everything is. This has two drive belts. Very, very simplistic to replace. But then you look here. These are AC lines. For some reason, they take this detour and they go all the way around. And this is something with old cars when they used to design things. It almost feels like they were last-minute add-ons. I mean, why would these lines wrap up here and then they come back here and it's just this maze of things going on? Adds a little bit of complication. But that's how they did old cars. And of course, the world's mechanics' least favorite type of union for AC lines is this. Loves to corrode. And this car, of course, is almost rust-free, so that's not an issue. But loves to corrode, and then it'll never come off again. And then we look at the smaller, old-school details. See, most modern cars will have all kinds of complicated clamps for the boots for the rack and pinion. I mean, when you look at this, it's basically a mechanic's wire wrapped up. That's how it is from the factory, and that's how Mazda did things back in the day. We look at the front suspension. It is a double wishbone suspension, which is pretty sophisticated suspension for this era of time. You look at the control arm here, then there's the famous wishbone at the top, and then the strut going through it. Very cool design. The ball joint actually does separate from the control arm in a different way. Pretty interesting. Then we look at the front brakes. It is a single piston caliper here. Very simple, very basic. Works pretty good. The brakes are very potent in this car because it is lightweight. Then we look at more old school stuff. Look at these brake lines and fuel lines. Now, this is not a coated brake line. You get salt on this, enough salt, they're just going to start corroding. But the interesting thing is, it's not coated here, which is an open section, but then if you get right at the edge, right here, they do start getting coated. This is just the strange decisions that Mazda did at the time, which are pretty interesting. Then we move to the rear, which we have something pretty interesting here. And this, of course, is a four-disc brake car. But when you look at this, this is actually a more modern style caliper where the parking brake was like a screw-in caliper style, but you see it here in '99. That was actually cutting edge for the time. The rear suspension is also pretty sophisticated suspension. I mean, most cars in this area had basically beam suspension. That was the norm in the '90s. Here, you have full independent rear suspension. Very cool setup, and that really adds to the reason why this car handles so well. But then there's something very similar to the newer Mazda Miata, and this is where it came from. If you look here, let's look all the way from the transmission, this big behemoth right here, that goes all the way to the differential. That is basically one of the coolest things about the Mazda Miata ever. This is the biggest, most elaborate structural piece that literally connects your transmission to your differential, making them almost like a tube, like they're one unit, because this big reinforcement piece connects them together, and that adds to the driving dynamic. I mean, basically, there's no movement and flex and wobbly feeling. No, everything is locked. And it's thanks to this, and you actually see this in the newer model as well. Very interesting design and very unique. There's not a lot of cars like this. This is super cool. Then we look in the back. Things are extremely basic here. Of course, you have all this open space, very easy cars to work on. Big differential. It's actually a pretty sizable differential. And the best part about it is it has all these cooling fins. And if you look around the back, it has even more of these cooling fins in the back. I mean, this is not a high power car where you're going to be overheating this stuff, but they still wanted it to run cool and they put all these cooling fins. This is super cool. I mean, this car is such a well-engineered car for its time, and even by today's standards, there are things here that are pretty high tech, and here we are in '99 and it has all these features. Very cool car. Let's take a small tour outside the '99 NB1 Miata. And the first thing is, when this model came out, people were disappointed. The pop-up headlights were gone, things changed. But I think this actually looks, it almost has like a smiling face. That's just, to me, when I see this, it does look like that. Now, some of the key differences between this and the 2001, the MB2, is the headlights. That was one thing. So these headlights have a single bulb that is high beam, low beam. The MB2 had two bulbs separate, one for high beam, one for low beam. Slightly different design of the headlight, but overall look from very far away, it's not significant. There's something about this generation Mazda Miata that is super interesting to me design-wise. If you look right here, there's actually a hump literally in the middle of the hood. Potentially hard to see on camera. It's such a subtle hump, but that is very, very interesting. And I wonder if they did that to accommodate the engine size. But then as we wrap around, things are extremely simple, but there's one thing that I have to mention. If we get a little low here, you have exposed tow hooks. I mean, this is a cue for Toyota in their 22 Tundra that doesn't have tow hooks. The Mazda Miata does, the old one. They're right here. Very interesting. Now, these are about the only damage marks on this car. There's two. They look like perfect license plate marks. Probably somebody backed into it, damaged it, unfortunately. But other than that, this body is almost perfect. As we wrap around and we look at more relics, this is a time where design did not need to be all over the place. This is a curve, and that's about it. Everything else is straight down. There's nothing going on here, yet it still looks super cool. Cars don't need to have a complicated design to be cool looking. They just have to be an honest design. And this is exactly what this is. I mean, the wheels look right. They're tiny little wheels. I wonder what size these are. Let's look at the size. These are 14-inch wheels. On the other channel, we reviewed the GR Corolla, which had rotors this size. These are 14-inch wheels. There we go. As we roll around the side, I love the design of the mirrors. They don't have a lot going on, but they just have a little crease on them, and it just looks absolutely right. Just fits the flows with the body lines and just looks absolutely right. Now, this is the convertible top. There is this little vinyl thing that goes here to cover the top, but that's how this basically has a few snaps and it comes out, and that's where and this clips on here, and that's where the convertible top is. Pretty interesting design. This, according to the owner, does come with the car, so I suppose that's how Mazda did it. But if you look here, this is the fuel door, and it's kind of an interesting place that it's standing up straight. You don't see a lot of cars these days. This is how that looks like open. Very interesting place for the fuel door. It's like on a flat surface, not on the side of the car. You just don't see designs like that anymore. And then welcome to the 90s, where we used to have antennas, because car manufacturers at that time could not figure out how to put the antenna somewhere else where it's not sticking out and ready to be broken by every car wash. Something about the 99 that was interesting. This was still the era of automatically retractable and, you know, the automatic antennas. This one doesn't have one. It just have a stick that you unscrew and you take out. Pretty interesting. But as we wrap our way around the back, I just love this classic look. And the best part is, it says clearly Miata MX-5. And that is the best part. I don't understand the MX-5 thing. They love to do that. It should have just been called the Miata. That's how everybody knows it. This one says it clearly. And I love how the Miata is bigger than the MX-5. That's how it should be. Of course, the MX-5 or the Miata does have a trunk. And let's open the trunk because we do have some interesting goodies here. First thing is, we talked about, when we looked under the hood, we talked about their design being so ingenious that they wanted to distribute the weight properly. One of those things is, if you look right on this edge, right here, that's where your battery is at. And that was intentional by design. They wanted to put the battery all the way in the back to keep the weight distributed, put some heavier stuff in the back. And when you lo and behold this beautiful sight of this, the world's probably smallest spare tire. I mean, the car has a 14-inch wheel. Of course, this is also a tiny spare tire, but it does have a spare tire nonetheless. I just love the little details on this car. If you look here, that's where your license plate bulbs are. Very interesting spot for them. I mean, if I was designing this car, I would have put them right here where they come to the side, don't have to run the wire in the trunk. But they wanted even the littlest details to be like that. This is a super well-engineered car, yet it is so simple. See, this is the days where sometimes brilliant engineering was just simplicity, not over-the-top, in-your-face stuff. And this car screams that everywhere, even the new one to a point. Let's take a look at the inside of the 99 Mazda Miata. There's something here that, the minute I laid eyes on this car, it just reminds me of the newest model that we reviewed. Is this that soul of simplicity, the focused interior? This is not an interior to wow you, this is an interior to make you smile. And that's the whole thing. Of course, this car is a convertible, which is a manual convertible top. Very cool. But let's talk about a few things on this interior that are basically period correct and interesting to see today in 2023. So the first thing is, center stack is very simple. Starts wide, then it comes really narrow, and then it starts getting wide again. And that is very interesting because this is where you need your hip space to sit down. There's a little engineering cue to give you a little bit more space inside the car. Now, something else about this car is this was from an era where airbags were just starting to become the norm in cars, and you actually had a keyhole to turn them on or off. So this car predates the time where we have occupant detection sensors, where if you put a child here, it's actually better to turn off the airbag. Very cool and very time period correct. But then there's more stuff. So this car has a glove box, pretty actually decent sized glove box. It's locking, which is pretty standard on all cars. But then the center console, which opens on the side, and it has a little touch. There's a little latch that holds it up. It's a mechanical latch, and you can even hear it making this mechanical sound. This latch also has a keyhole in the back to lock it. I'm assuming the idea here was you leave the convertible top open, and then you walk away from this car, you lock it and walk away. Nobody can really come in and steal your belongings. But wait, what about the stuff in the trunk? What about people who like to randomly put sugar in the fuel tank just for fun? Well, actually, this is where Mazda engineering really went above and beyond. They actually put the trunk release and the fuel door release inside of this little center console lid. Very smart, because now you can lock everything, leave the top down, walk away. Well, unless they're stealing a radio or something, which in 2023, if anybody wants to steal this radio, be my guest. It's a CD player that's very old school. There's not much to take away from this car because your glove box is locked, this is locked, and that's about it. This is very cool. Something extremely interesting about this car, as small as it is and as cramped as you think it is, it's actually super comfortable. Very low, potentially harder to get into if you're older or you have knee or you're super tall. Once you get in here, it's a place that makes you smile. But then there is one more small touch. See, this was the days where Mazda was even a smaller company than they are today, and things were interesting for them. If you look at the steering wheel, actually it doesn't say Mazda. It says Nardi. That is the thing they did for the first couple of years of this car. Then later it moved to Mazda, but that's how things were. So folks, that is the 99 Mazda Miata. There is something beautiful about this car, that it's not a fast car. It's not particularly the best handling car in the world. And in 1999, the horsepower wars were already starting. Many cars had big power and they handled really well and all that. But there's something about the Mazda Miata magic, is what I call it. The minute you see it, you smile. The minute you drive it, you smile. This is a car that you can take on a small track and have fun with it. But really, it is a cruising car, a car that puts a smile on your face, makes your heart happy. You will rarely see Mazda Miata owners that are upset. They're always happy. And the best part about this car, and usually with older cars that you get today and you want to enjoy, they are a nightmare because they're unreliable, they're old, things are falling apart, and it just kind of ruins the ride. But these are relatively reliable, and that's the best part. Even the older ones, they're super simple to work on DIY. They're not complicated. Yes, you can modify them a lot, but I advise you not to, because the prices for these are only going to rise for the unmodified, stock, preserved examples. And it's such a joy to drive. They just don't make cars like this that are true to their mission. Just a driving pleasure. Not going to get you in trouble with the cops. Not going to really put you in danger in any way. It is still a fun rear-wheel drive car that handles pretty decent for what it is. That'll put a giant smile on your face. Folks, if you see one of these, now you know a little bit more about them. I know usually with the Mazda community, the Miata community, the first one with the pop-up headlights, that is the true star of the show. But these are equally a star of the show in my opinion, because they are beautiful cars. They have that Miata soul. And Miata owners, or if you've driven one, you know what I'm talking about. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.